Sometimes called Mr. Untouchable, Leroy Nicky Barnes became one of the biggest drug dealers in New York City during the 1970s. Born on October 15, 1933, in New York City, and called Mr. Untouchable, Leroy Nicky Barnes became one of the most infamous drug dealers in New York during the 1970s. He helped found a criminal organization known as the Council, which handled a large share of the city's heroin trade. In March 1977, he was arrested, jailed, and eventually released into the Witness Protection Program in 1998. New York gangster. Organized crime figure. Born on October 15, 1933, in New York City. Sometimes called Mr. Untouchable, Leroy Nicky Barnes became one of the biggest drug dealers in New York City during the 1970s. He helped found a criminal organization known as the Council, which handled a large share of the city's heroin trade. According to his autobiography, Mr. Untouchable, 2007, Barnes started selling drugs at an early age. He ran with a street gang for a time and developed a taste for heroin, which quickly became an addiction. In 1950, Barnes was arrested for possession of a hypodermic needle. He was later arrested for possession of burglary tools and then for breaking into cars, which earned him a 3-year sentence at the Manhattan House of Corrections, more colorfully known as the Tombs. Released in 1954, Barnes returned to his life of dealing on the streets. He got nabbed by the police on a drug charge in 1959 and was sentenced to 5 years at Green Haven State Prison. While incarcerated, Barnes befriended known mob figure Matty Madonna. Both were engaged in the drug trade, and reportedly shared information on their illegal enterprises. Barnes was released in 1962, and sought to expand his underground operations. Trouble with the law. Barnes's dream of creating a huge drug empire was interrupted in 1965. He was arrested for possession of more than $500,000 worth of narcotics, according to a report in the New York Times. The article indicated that the police considered Barnes one of the biggest distributors of narcotics in Harlem and the Bronx. At this time, it was estimated that about 50 people worked for Barnes in his drug operation. Barnes claimed that he had been set up by the police on the possession charge in his autobiography. In 1966, Barnes received a 15 to 20-year sentence, and went back to Green Haven State Prison. There he converted to Islam, and studied law journals. Also during his time at Green Haven, Barnes made friends with reported mafia crime boss Crazy Joey Gallo. Back on the streets. Barnes eventually won his release on appeal in 1971. Inspired by the Italian mafia, Barnes helped bring together a group of African American drug dealers to form the Council. The Council addressed such business issues as what drug suppliers to use and how to handle any difficult situations or people. Barnes, however, maintained veto power over the group's decisions. Prominent members of the Council include Frank James, Ishmael Muhammad, Joseph Jazz Hayden, Thomas Scapps Foreman, and Guy Fisher. The group's motto, according to Barnes, was "Treat my brother as I treat myself." Flush with cash, Barnes was known to live the high life. He frequented nightclubs and had numerous girlfriends in addition to his wife. A fan of flashy cars, he drove around in expensive vehicles such as Mercedes and Citroën Maseratis. Barnes was often followed by law enforcement surveillance teams and enjoyed leading them on wild goose chases. He also liked to look good, owning approximately 300 custom-made suits, 50 leather coats, and 100 pairs of shoes. Mr. Untouchable. Barnes ran afoul of the law several times in 1974. In May, he was arrested in connection to the murder of Clifford Haynes. Haynes was the brother of Guy Fisher's girlfriend who had run away with some of the Council's money. According to Barnes's autobiography, Haynes was killed in attempt to get information from him about his sister's whereabouts. That December, Barnes was pulled by the police. The officers on the scene discovered more than $130,000 in cash in his car, and claimed that Barnes tried to bribe the May claim he disputed. The following year, Barnes was found not guilty in the bribery case, and acquitted in the murder case. He was arrested again in October 1976 for possession of illegal weapons after he and some of his associates were pulled over by the police. For a time, Barnes's ability to escape the long arm of the law earned him the nickname Mr. Untouchable. But his luck ran out in March 1977 when he was arrested on narcotics conspiracy charges along with several of his associates. Barnes was also charged with operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Before his trial started, Barnes appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. The accompanying article was titled Mr. Untouchable. President Jimmy Carter reportedly saw the article and put pressure on prosecutors to convict Barnes. Trial and imprisonment. Barnes and his co-conspirators, including Guy Fisher, went on trial in September 1977. According to the case presented by United States Attorney Robert B. Fisk, Jr., the defendants had been selling roughly $1 million worth of heroin a month from a Harlem garage. An extensive undercover operation had gathered the evidence used in the case. After a 2-month trial, Barnes and 10 of his co-defendants were found guilty. Fisher was acquitted of the charges. On January 19, 1978, Barnes was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and sent to the Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois to serve his time. Barnes eventually decided to testify against some of his former associates, including Guy Fisher, in an attempt to shorten his sentence. In a joint interview with rival drug kingpin Frank Lucas in New York Magazine, Barnes explained that he became a federal witness after feeling betrayed by his associates, especially Fisher. "When I went to the joint, I gave Guy Fisher a woman of mine and told him to look out for her, take care of her," Barnes said. But he was enraged to learn that Fisher had gotten romantically involved with her as well. Starting a new life. Barnes was then transferred to another facility with a special witness protection unit and testified in several cases. In 1998, he was released from prison. Barnes entered the Federal Witness Protection Program and started a new life with a new identity. In 2007, he published his autobiography, Mr. Untouchable, which he co-wrote with Tom Folsom. Barnes gave an interview to the New York Times around the time of the book's release and described his new life. "I live within my paycheck. I want to get up every day and go to work and be a respected member of my community. I'm not looking in the rearview mirror to see if anyone is tailing me anymore," he explained. A documentary on Barnes, Mr. Untouchable, was released in 2007. The story of his rival Frank Lucas also made it onto the big screen in the crime drama American Gangster. Denzel Washington played Lucas, and Cuba Gooding, Jr. played Barnes. While he has stayed out of trouble since his release, Barnes still sometimes yearns for his days as a crime boss. "I miss it," he explained to the New York Times. "There was glamour, money, influence, attractive women. I didn't have financial concerns, and I do have them now." The 74-year-old man who used to be Leroy Nicholas Barnes, owner of 60 pairs of custom-made shoes, 27 full-length leather coats and more than one Mercedes-Benz, wears baggy lead dungarees these days and drives to work in a used car he bought 5 years ago. With his slight limp and mostly bald pate, he seems the antithesis of his former persona as Mr. Untouchable, the dashing Harlem heroin dealer who posed 30 years ago on a magazine cover in a blue denim suit and red, white and blue tie. Barnes' posture of smug invulnerability so affronted President Jimmy Carter that he ordered his attorney general to, as they say, prosecute Barnes to the fullest extent of the law. The Justice Department did just that. And in 1977, Nicky Barnes, a former addict with a junior high school education who made a fortune flooding black neighborhoods with heroin and swaggered around as an invincible outlaw, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. "He was the number one, he had charisma," said Sterling Johnson, Jr., a federal judge and former special narcotics prosecutor in New York City. "Have you been in the presence of Bill Clinton when he walks down the street?" That was Nicky Barnes. While Barnes languished behind bars, Though, his former cronies, his wife and his girlfriends began cavorting, he said, squandering the criminal enterprise that had made them all millionaires. So much for honor among thieves. Barnes felt betrayed. They had a sleeping lion, a caged lion, he recalled, and they woke him up. And so Barnes roared, so ferocious a government witness that scores of drug dealers were convicted. He was released into the Federal Witness Protection Program in 1998. And then he disappeared. Years ago, a former associate predicted how difficult it would be for Barnes to adjust to a life of anonymity if he ever turned informer and was granted a fresh identity. If he runs a laundromat in Dubuque or a grocery store in Slippery Rock, that's one thing, the associate said. But the man has a tremendous amount of charisma and intelligence. I don't think he's going to be innocuous anywhere. For nearly a decade, though, Barnes says, he has managed to seamlessly insinuate himself into mainstream America, this time untouchable by those he incriminated and the friends and families of foes he murdered.